Hey guys, welcome. How are you guys doing today? Yay, right. So I'm Rob Tompkins, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and this talk is about contributing and how I got to be a PMC member on Apache Commons in a 16-month period starting in, I guess that would have been March of 16, and I wound up on the PMC in July of 17. June of 17, something like that. Anyway, so who is this guy? I am a mathematician by schooling. I work at Capital One doing DevOps and delivery in Java. And I'm on the project management committee for Commons. If you want to know more about me, find me afterwards. Oh, I released the last version of Commons Lang. So my name's on something that's fairly widely used. And I'm going to crack through these. So what is Apache Commons? Apache Commons is a ubiquitous Java collection of libraries, okay? Commons started off, well, I'll start on that next. Commons is the main Java sharing place for all of the Java things at Apache. And so if there's code that needs to be shared across Solar, for example, or Tika or what have you, then we put everything into one place. In fact, I was talking to Tim about this earlier, about how we want to move some things out of Tika into Commons text for the sake of doing word manipulation and looking at words. But we put all the common Java stuff in these projects for the Apache projects. So how did it come into being? At one point at Apache, they aligned all of the projects by language, and Jakarta happened to be the Java one, okay? And at that point in time, they were like, okay, well, let's put the common stuff under Jakarta Commons, okay? And so we put everything under Jakarta Commons, and then Jakarta got broken up because we were like, well, maybe we should actually align projects by intent as opposed to by language. And so we broke things up, and Commons was still common. We were like, oh, okay, it's still common. Let's keep it as Commons. Seems like a good idea. And our current mission is to be the shared location for the Java stuff at Apache Commons. We actually have some appetite to do more than Java development. There's been talk of Scala. There's been talk of Groovy. There's been talk of a couple other languages. I've even heard talk of Go. I'm not very opinionated as to whether or not we start those components. So if we do that, sweet. If we don't, sweet. Like Jim said, it's all about community. So this slide is for giving this talk at, community colleges and things like that. I'm assuming that you guys all know what open source software is. Does anybody in the room not? I had a definition after this. Okay, good. What are the benefits of open source software? The benefits are that you kind of start going down the road of standardization. So the software industry is a lot like the industry of making machines back in the mid to late 1800s, in that if like a screw on a machine broke, you had to go to a blacksmith to get the screw built to go in the hole for your machine, right? And slowly over the beginning of the 20th century, people started being like, oh, well, if we standardize on thread pattern and thread depth, then you can go to the store and just buy one of these suckers and stick it in your machine. So open source is kind of that for the software industry, because, I mean, essentially we're all craftsmen that are doing something a lot like carpentry, but it's convenient to be able to go and buy a dowel at the store. So that's what open source does. And like Jim said earlier, more eyes, fewer bugs, because we all know that our only good test environment's production. For better or for worse, that's the case. The combinatorial possibilities available to you in test just aren't there. And so production is the best way to figure out where the bugs are, and these open source libraries have been in production for a long bloody time, so that's pretty sweet. And you get long-term support out of this, right? So if I'm using Commons Lang, it's been there for, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, right? And it's still there. There's still people releasing it. There's still people checking in bug fixes. And sweet, I don't even have to think about that. If I can get my company to lean into something like this, then I get free long-term support. It's awesome. So Benedict Ritter's law. Benedict actually is on Apache Commons. I stole this from him from a slide back in 17. And it essentially says that it's kind of like the Newtonian idea of I'm going to stand on the shoulders of the giants before me, okay, and use what they've done. Granted, that was kind of a tongue-in-cheek thumb to the face of Hook, who invented the spring constant log, by the way, because he was a short dude. But we stand on the giants of the folks, or the shoulders of the giants before us, and move forward with that, okay? And so everything that's out there has probably been written by somebody smarter than me, okay? So why not use that stuff as opposed to rewriting it? And so that's the idea. Granted, there are some wacko, cobbled together legacy systems that sometimes you have to, stitch together as best you can, and that's where we write our code. But why write utilities that have already been written? Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't reinvent the wheel. Although, maybe you want a wheel that's got, a polygon or something like that so that it bumps you along as opposed to riding smooth like the ones that we have in cars. So why did I get involved? Actually, the guy who encouraged me to get involved is in the room today. I can thank him for that. But it was March of 16, like I said, and my second kid was on the way, and right when we were having the kid, I was like, oh, I don't have to be at work for 2 weeks, so I've got some free time, right? Right? I got some free time, so I'm going to start trying to check some code into an open source library and try to get involved. And maybe I'm going to get more money because I'm checking code into open source. And in hindsight, open source is free, right? So, and I'm doing this altruistically and on a volunteer basis. So I don't really get paid for the work that I do with Commons, but thanks to the guy who's in the room, I got promoted at Capital One because of my open source contributions. So in all, seriousness, there is a good reason to do this. And like Jim said, I was doing it to keep my mathematics sharper too, because at that point I was a couple years out of school. And I don't know, I like thinking about math. I don't know why. It's good stuff. Career advancement, like I said. And it's really convenient to not be constrained by the timelines afforded us at work, right? This needs to be done by next Wednesday. Why does this need to be done by next Wednesday? Because I said so, because we've got a deadline. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm working through the night to get this done by next Wednesday. In fact, last week I put in 2 night shifts because something had to be due by Wednesday, arbitrarily. It's great stuff. But when you're doing stuff in the open source, you can get it right. I mean, you could really get it right. You can spend your time and work through the problem and get other folks to look at the solution, and you're like, okay, this really feels good when I finish it. It's like, a freshly cut lawn. You're like, sweet, this is done. It looks good. So that's really why I got involved. Okay, so what do you do to get involved? What do you do? Pick a subject that you like. It's a good thing. I like math. particularly mathematical logic, and thinking about why math doesn't work in some circumstances. But we can talk about that later. If it's on GitHub, you can generally find who's checking things in where. It's pretty straightforward to do this. And if we look at this is actually Commons Lang. This is the contributors page. If you look up there in the commits thing, you can click on contributors on the right-hand side, and you can find that, you know, Gary Gregory is out there leading the list. Benedict Ritter of Ritter's Law is leading the list, and I can email these guys. I can find them, and I can be like, hey, I want to get involved. Tell me what to do. And that's what I did, and it worked. I don't know why, it just did. So ask people what you should work on. Find our mailing list. This is a great way to find contacts, right? Because I'm always sending out things about what to work on. I was sending an email just yesterday saying, oh, sorry guys, I'm busy right now. I can finish the release tomorrow after I give my talk. My best friend's in town from Albuquerque. I'll finish the release on the Commons parent tomorrow. That's today now. So because my email address is on there, then you can email me personally, and that's cool. You can look at the readme.md or the contributing.md. They give good suggestions on how to contribute, ideas, you know. Email someone directly. You can email me, hi. And this is a good example of our mailing lists page. So we have a users list. I know this is great. You can see it so well. But I can read it for you guys. So the security list is here, the users list is here, the development list is here, the issues list is here. These are subscribe buttons, these are unsubscribe buttons. And it's as simple as finding that. Every Apache website, every Apache project website has that. So how do you figure out what to work on? A great place to start is in the unit tests or in the documentation, okay? Because if I break a unit test, it's not going to break something that goes to production, okay? And so I can lean in and I can start writing unit tests and actually start figuring out how these suckers work, because I mean these projects are inherently complex, because as we established earlier, there's some dudes that are bloody smarter than I am writing this stuff. But if we sit down and work our way through it, it's not so bad. No one has 100% test coverage. For example, the database connection library that everybody uses last fall had 45% coverage. You know, it's kind of like, eek, we need to squeak those numbers up. And we've done it over the last couple months. And I'm sure the Tomcat guys are happy about that. Chris is back there smiling. Find a ticket. Jira's out there. It's publicly available. You can create an account. I grabbed this one about parsing numbers and how, oddly enough, in Java, I think 6, if you put a second leading 0 on the beginning of an integer, it would parse out to not a number or something like that. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would it do that? So I helped our number parsing, and that actually was sufficient and weighty enough to get me commit rights. And that was, I guess, September of 16 when I finally got commit rights on the project. And then that was after the 4 months of writing tests. So becoming familiar with the community. This is going to mirror a lot of what Jim said. So how do I get in and read the documentation, read the documentation, read the documentation, read the documentation, and then read the documentation again? Because these guys have spent lots of time writing this stuff. And it's good. And these projects have good documentation. I mean, there's some out there that have not as good documentation, and you can lean into the email lists to figure out how to get involved and ask about what's going on in the project, and that's a good idea too. Don't be afraid to hop in on the mailing list and start asking people and talking to people and being like, well, have you guys thought of this? I mean, for example, I have original work in math just out of naivety. I was there one day and somebody posed something and I was like, what about this? And they were like, what? You should explore that. And there's no reason to think that everyone in here has some insightful idea given the right circumstances, okay? And a lot of times you're wrong. That's okay. I mean, like 90% of the time I'm wrong. But that 10% of the time that I'm right got me original worth in math, right? And so you just have to be willing to be wrong a lot. And that's okay. And that's why we have communities and people that help us find when we're right and wrong, because you can't figure out if you're right or wrong if you're walled off in your own box writing your own code. Try to stick to plus or minus 0 votes. Those are places where you can actually be like, okay, I'm not going to block this. 5 minutes left. I'm not going to block this, but I think you should think about these points. So on the ASS style of voting, we've seen this. How about that? I can roll through this real fast because I've got that 5 minutes left. +1, I'm in, -1 veto. Regarding privileges, we've also seen this. Users are actually, people don't give users enough credit, okay? Because of the way the licensing works, the users are essentially open source developers, okay? Because they have to test this code with their code that they're sending to production. And a lot of people don't realize how important the user base is. But now that we've gone through that, a contributor is anyone that has commits in the repository. A committer is somebody that can merge commits into the repository. They can present votes and can perform releases. I know you guys can't read that because it's below the podium. And a committee member is somebody that has voting privileges, can establish releases, get releases out the door. If somebody -1's a release and they're a PMC member, no release. They can propose new committers. And the committee chair prepares a quarterly report. I'm glad that I'm not the chair of Apache Commons right now because I don't like paperwork, but if I was asked to be the chair, then I would be okay with it because, I mean, I was asked to lug boxes of books up here from the parking deck, and I'm okay with that, okay? And it all helps us all together. So after I got commit rights, what did I do? I asked Gary and Benedict what I should do. And they said, how about this sandbox project that we have called Commons Text? And I happen to have done research in combinatorics on words, okay? And I was like, okay, well, this isn't too far afield from me. I've got Lothaire's combinatorics on words on my bookshelf, both the applied and algebraic variety, if you want to know about that. It's good stuff. But I've got those on my bookshelf. Why don't I use those books and lean into this project a little bit and, you know, expound on some of the edit distances that are available, and let's see if we can get a first release out the door, okay? And we did that. And I did that just as a committer. And I needed some help from the PMC members because there's some things that you can't quite do as a committer, like after the fact log that the release has taken place in certain places, and that's okay. These guys are totally willing to help. And so I did that. I read up on the process for releasing the components, and the process was there. It was all written well in the documentation. And so I did a beta release, I did a release, I did 2 dot releases. And then after that, I helped out with a security fix on Commons file upload and did a release of that. And after having done all of that, they were like, hey, we'll pull you into the PMC. And now I'm in the PMC. So I've got some other activities on here. I spoke on text. There's the file upload release. Help validate releases. Voted into the PMC. I've done some other stuff. I've helped remediate our release process and make it faster so that it's not a 4-hour manual process. We can get it down to like 40 minutes now just by automating stuff. I fixed something. This CVE is kind of sweet. It was Commons jelly. It hadn't been touched since 2005. It was just archaic. And I went in with a Docker container and I built a 2005 development environment and fixed this CVE, which was kind of fun. But if you guys want to know about that, we can talk about that after the fact. And that's the release plugin I was telling you about. So, now that we're done, I've got 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? Chris?
Was your file upload bug the Equinix one?
Oh man, don't ask me to remember. I didn't actually do the fix. Jochen did the fix on it, and I was the one that did the release. Okay. That bug, we fixed it in December. We fixed it in December, and so we fixed it back in 17 and released that fix, and I think that actually fixed it. And then we did a different fix in December that was a different part of file upload, but we made it work for that. So yes, the Equifax bug was something that I touched back in December. They were running on old code. They were running on an old version of the code that hadn't been patched. And that happens. It's convenient to have the fix in master if something like that happens already and have found it. Maybe that's why the Equifax thing happened, is because we had fixed the CVE and announced it. Chris says it's not. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Amari.
How was the first time we actually submitted the fix? Did you just put your fix out there and submit it?
I was talking to people on a regular basis, okay? So like I'm sitting there talking to this guy in France by the name of Giles, and I'm saying, hey, I'm gonna write unit tests on the differentiators in common math, okay? So making sure that our derivatives are being calculated appropriately. And so I went through and I wrote a bunch of unit tests for derivatives and submitted that. And because I had been talking to him on a regular basis, it was a whole lot easier to get it in. Yeah, so talking to somebody is generally helpful. That said, lobbing pull requests over is an okay thing to do. The speed of closure on pull requests is a lot slower if you're doing that because you don't actually have engagement, and that's okay. We understand that, and that's also the case with projects that I work on at Capital One that are inter-source projects where the people that are submitting bugs aren't in my direct reporting chain. If they lob a pull request over, then like a 2-week closure is reasonable. A pull request on an open source project, a 6-week to 8-week closure is reasonable. If you're actively working with somebody and they're telling you and coaching you how to do a fix, and then they stop talking to you for 6 to 8 weeks, that's questionable on what's going on that guy's end. Maybe there's something going on in his life. I would hope that he would be open and honest about that and say, hey, some stuff happened. I'm gonna have to step away for a little bit. Maybe you should talk to this guy, because I mean, that's what I would do if I had something come up. Anyway, Kevin's here to announce the fact that it's break time, I presume?
It is break time. Yeah, we've got about 30 minutes for some networking, some coffee. There's still some breakfast out there, and we'll reconvene about 45 after. And if you want to hear
Okay, cool. So if you guys have any questions for me, find me during the break time. Thanks.